Good afternoon, everyone. It is 3 o'clock, and it's time for us to begin our next panel. I know we have people that are transitioning from the snack table into the ballroom again, so we'll ask that you would do that just a little more quietly, and if we could close some of our conversations out as we prepare to hear from our next set of experts. So the title of this panel is Illustrating State-Level Work on Issues of Equity, Implementation, and Capacity. And my name is Brea Ratliff. I'll be your moderator this afternoon. I am the immediate past president of the Benjamin Banneker Association, which is an advocacy organization and affiliate of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. On our panel with us this afternoon, we'll have Pamela Burdman, who is a senior project director at the Opportunity Institute, Stephanie Davidson, who is vice chancellor for academic affairs at the Ohio Department of Education, Kathleen Almy, who is a mathematics research associate for Education Systems Center at Northern Illinois University, and Mark Freed, who is with the Oregon Department of Education. So we will begin with Pamela Burdman, and thank you all for your attention.
Hello? Can you hear me? Hi. So I'm with Just Equations, which is a new project that I founded last year, based at the Opportunity Institute in Berkeley. We work in California and beyond to reconceptualize the role of math in education equity, which is, I think, part of what we all have been trying to do today. We specifically work to connect policy and practice with policy and practice, research, and advocacy. So it's an issue I've been interested in for more than a decade because I was working at the time at the Hewlett Foundation, and I saw the outsized role that math was playing in education outcomes. And like many people here, I met Uri Treisman. So I learned of some of the promising work that could happen in this field and some of the potential. So I feel in talking about equity, it's important to say what the definition of equity is. We could talk about it at length, but I like to quote a definition from Rochelle Gutierrez that she once wrote, that it's the inability to predict mathematics achievement and participation based solely on student characteristics such as race, class, ethnicity, sex, beliefs, and proficiency in the dominant language. Unfortunately, it's a pretty simple calculation to say that we haven't achieved that definition. Unpacking the reasons for this is a bit more complicated. So I put out a report last year in which I attempted to do some of that, building on the work of others. And what I called it is the prevailing architecture of math opportunity. And this architecture is sort of undergirded by misconceptions about math skill. The idea that math is something innate, you either have it or you don't have it, or that math is solely about right and wrong answers and speed and acceleration, as opposed to thinking and reasoning and creativity and depth. And then these misconceptions are unfortunately scaffolded by many of the existing inequities in our education system. There's differential access to resources, to good teaching. There is bias on the part of teachers and schools on the base of race and other factors, and there's even internalized bias in the form of stereotype threat. And lastly, this architecture is sort of reinforced by the way that success in math serves as a form of pedigree to confer or deny access to educational privilege. So I'm not a mathematician or a math educator. I was actually a philosophy major. But if I were, this would not be how I would want my discipline to be used. And I much prefer the definition that NCTM used in catalyzing change, which was the purpose of math to expand professional opportunity, understand and critique the world and experience beauty, joy, and wonder. So how do we get there? Unfortunately, explaining these inequities, though complex, is not nearly as complicated as understanding how to change them. I talk about 4 dimensions of math education, 4 equity dimensions. There's the content, instruction, and assessment, the elements of practice that together shape what students learn, how they learn or don't learn it, and how we measure what they're learning. And then there are these math readiness policies and structures. So the content, instruction, and assessment are sort of braided together to inform and be informed by these policies. And the policies are determining how and whether students can access advancement in math, in STEM, and in education generally. So our project, oh, whoops, forgot about that, okay. Our project looks at 3 main areas of math opportunity policies. We look at math pathways and placement, which we've talked a lot about here today. We look at high school math pathways and redesigning those. And we've also looking at how do we rethink post-secondary admissions policies, because again, these are some of the policies that reinforce the way math is used as a gatekeeper. Now, to speak about California, as I've been asked to do, when it comes to redesigning post-secondary math, we have 2 main developments. The CSU system has some new executive orders, and the community colleges some new legislation, and they're implementing math pathway co-requisites and new placement approaches. At the high school level, high schools are working in partnership with higher education to design new high school math pathways. The state funded a project to develop new senior year courses, new and innovative courses. And when it comes to admissions, our state will be considering a proposal from the Cal State system to require more math for university admissions, which is something that my organization has raised some concerns about, specifically because of the concern of whether this would make admissions less likely for students of color. So, one sec. There we go. So this is just a look at some of the readiness policies in California. California is one of very few states to require, at the state level, only 2 years of math for high school graduation. There are districts that require more, but at the state level, it's 2 years of math, including Algebra 1. As you know, Common Core contains 3 years and recommends 4, and that's also what the 4-year universities are currently requiring. However, there's consideration of making that a 4-year requirement. So that's one of the questions. However, because of one of the concerns is because some schools only require 2 years for graduation, that contributes to wide disparities in access to advanced math courses. And we are not convinced that changing admissions policies will reduce this, especially because of the shortage we have of math and science teachers. At the same time, I want to call your attention to the 4th column. We're very encouraged at the movement in the state of California to recognize some new math pathways as meeting requirements for general education math as well as for university admissions. For several decades, actually, California's universities have accepted statistics as a general education math course, which I know has happened more recently in many states. And some of these new math pathways are also meeting the requirements for university admissions, such as Introduction to Data Science course that was initially piloted in LAUSD, Kendall Brown over there at the California table is involved with that. If the CSU system does begin requiring 4 years of math for admissions, they have said that they would like that to include not just traditional STEM pathway courses, but other courses such as computer science and personal finance, in addition to the traditional courses. I would add that going back to the prior, well, forget about the prior slide, but when I talked about content instruction and assessment, this slide doesn't talk about instruction and assessment, so we also have to find ways in talking about these policies to include instruction and assessment, because I think we'd probably all agree that 3 years of really well-taught math is probably more important than 4 years of courses that have math terms in their name, but if the students aren't actually learning. So these are some of the issues that our organization is working on, and that in my initial discussions with the California team, I think they will be working on as well.
Get my timer going here so I don't go past my allotted 8 to 10 minutes. Hi, I'm Stephanie Davidson, and I'm from the Department of Higher Education in Ohio. And I was asked here today to talk with you about post-secondary reforms because of the work that the Ohio teams have done in terms of what we call the Ohio Mathematics Initiative. And this is an initiative that really has been going on for about the past 6 years. So it's not something new. It's something that has really taken some time to take root and grow. But again, I'm going to refer to Uri Treisman. I think, man, he's obviously a rock star here. But it was because of a number of folks from Ohio being at several national meetings and hearing Uri talk about the national trends that showed that folks were having a great deal of difficulty getting through their college mathematics courses, and then that in turn was affecting their student success. And we realized that Ohio, just like much of the nation, was having exactly the same problem. But we also had some Ohio-specific problems that were related to transfer. In Ohio, we have a really robust transfer system for general education, and because of that, most of the students who were going on into post-secondary education were being sent into your traditional college algebra course because that was a safe transfer course. But because that was a very specific course that had a specific number of credit hours, very specific course outcomes, very specific prerequisites, it was really killing any sort of innovation that higher ed faculty wanted to do in terms of mathematics pathways. So we knew we needed to come together and get something done. And those of you who've ever worked in Ohio or know anything about Ohio know that it is very much a local control state. So if we want to get anything done in Ohio, we can't do it top down. We really need to do it from the bottom up. So what we decided to do was to bring together a lot of mathematics leaders for a summit. And we had this meeting in 2013. We had faculty and department chairs and administrators from all of the public institutions in the state of Ohio. We have 23 community colleges and 14 universities. We had about 150 people in a room. Uri graciously agreed to come and be our keynote speaker. He's to provide national context and, of course, bring an element of, this is the right thing to do to our conference. So we brought all these people together. We shared a lot of data about student success. Really, it was about the lack of student success, I think. And we also had folks like Ricardo Moena, who's back at our table, who works on transfer issues, get up and talk about how our current system was really stifling innovation in the state. So at the end of that day in 2013, we had a call from the group to appoint a math steering committee. Let's see. And that steering committee was really made up of about 20 individuals. There were community college faculty, there were university faculty. We had some members who were there just from the Department of Education and the Department of Higher Education, some folks from the associations that represent community colleges and universities in the state. And the steering committee was given a charge that was basically kind of twofold: to just increase the success of students both in mathematics and in completion of their degree programs, but also to make sure that when we were doing that, we were still allowing for free transfer of students across the state. We didn't want to in any way destroy what we had built with our transfer system. So this group, this steering committee, met for about 6 months. And again, we used Uri Treisman and his colleague Jenna from the Dana Center. They spent a lot of time in Ohio with us over those 6 months. And the group really hashed out a lot of concerns, looked at a lot of data, listened to a lot of different people. At the end of 6 months, we had a 2-day retreat, which we again invited a large number of people to come back to that retreat. Again, all the key leaders in our community colleges and our universities, some administrators, some faculty members. They heard the recommendations from the steering committee, and then they had a chance to respond to those recommendations, make some suggestions for change, which the steering committee took back. And then after that, in 2014, the steering committee actually released a report called Rethinking Post-Secondary Mathematics. And that report's on our website, so if anybody wants to go and look at the details of it, you can see it. But basically, checking my time, basically what that does is there's 5 essential components that are outlined in that report that you can read here. The way that this is structured was structured from the steering committee on, was that each of these essential components has a working group that is responsible for things in these areas. And the working groups usually have about 10 to 15 people on them. Again, community college and university faculty working together, and as appropriate, people from the K-12 system working with the groups. And then they come together and work on various projects throughout the year. I think the most important essential component here is number 3, and I don't think we knew when we started that this would be the most important essential component, but we really have engaged a system of mathematics faculty who work together on a regular basis. All of the department chairs come together twice a year. Ohio State hosts them for a full-day meeting twice a year. They hear reports from working groups. They hear reports from the Department of Education. They hear reports from the Department of Higher Education. And then they task the different working groups for their charge for the next 6 months. What are the things that they're going to work on? And what this has really done is it's made a very powerful community of mathematicians that are hooked into what the state's doing, and then when we need folks, we know who to go to and talk with. So it's really allowed for, like I said, very robust conversations and things to move forward. Just to give you an idea of some of the work that has been done over the past 5 or 6 years. The first thing they did was they created a definition for a college-level mathematics course. When they started, there was all sorts of differences in what colleges thought the first college-level math course should be. And so they came up with a very specific definition. And just quickly, the definition is, and it's simple, a credit-bearing college-level course in mathematics must use the standards required for high school graduation in Ohio as a basis, and then do at least one of the following: broaden or deepen or extend students' learning. And so it made very clear that this was to follow on to what the students were expected to be learning in high school, but then take them further in some way by either broadening, deepening, or extending their learning. That gave everyone the kinds of flexibility that they needed to do all sorts of things. For introducing these other pathways in math, like statistics and quantitative literacy, and even discussing others like mathematics for educators or data science or mathematics for nursing. It's also, and I think this is really exciting, it's also allowing people to think about what the STEM pathway should look like when college algebra isn't kind of that amorphous course that really is designed for everybody. Now it can be we can have a pathway that really leads to physics. We can better align mathematics with each discipline. We go to this community when we want to develop co-requisite remediation or acceleration strategies. And as we're going to be talking about a lot here as a team, it's really allowed us to jump into developing this 12th grade transition course for students who are not quite ready for college level mathematics. So, as I said, I think it's getting this group, this community together and making a good relationship between the mathematicians and the state that's allowed us to really take things on and move things ahead. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over. Oops, you can see it.
Okay, you can hear me? Hey, y'all. Okay, so I'm Kathleen Almy. I'm going to talk to you. Oh, I should hit start on the timer. Always good, always good. I'm going to talk to you about transitional math, which are 12th grade courses in the state of Illinois, how we're doing them. And it's more than just taking intermediate algebra from a college and offering it in a high school. There's a very specific way we're going about them, and it's a little different than some states are doing. And we've learned a lot, and there's some things that are very promising that I want you to learn about. So basically, my role as the director of transitional math is I lead this, I'm the person that makes it happen. I'm the boots on the ground person that after the policy, I came in after the law was passed, we'll talk about that in a second, and now it's like, now what? How do we make it happen? Okay, so here's the problem, which I think we're all familiar with. We've got too many high school students that are graduating and going straight into remediation, and that's going to reduce the chances of them graduating. And in Illinois, and as we heard in some other states, it's because students may skip a 4th year of math, but also it's because we have so many great options for our strong students, that top quarter in terms of dual credit and AP, but what about our middle 50%? We do not have a lot of great options for them. And I work with a lot of high schools, there's 700 in Illinois, and many of them say, we have pre-calc and calc, and that's it, that's all we have. So if you're not ready for those, what do you take? When students come to colleges, traditional placement tests are still the norm because we're not using multiple measures and specifically high school GPA broadly. It's definitely getting momentum, but it's not the norm. Accepting a high school grade for a course is still not necessarily something our colleges are comfortable with. And we all see this. My background, I taught high school, but I also taught 20 years as a college, community college math faculty member. And if you've taught college, you know this, and taught high school too. A lot of times students just aren't ready for the rigors that they're going to see in college. So, and the other thing is, and I've heard many people talk about this today, and I think you know this, which is why I think this event is so amazing and the potential that it has. There is such a disconnect between secondary and post-secondary. We are so siloed. And it's that way. It doesn't matter if you're talking at a school level, administrative level, or agency level. It is very, very, very separate in most states. And so we're not aligning in terms of practice or philosophy, and it does have a big impact. So I've been a part of developmental math reform for over a decade, and a lot of the reforms that have been really popular so I want to show you these first ones, are things like emporiums that are self-paced instruction using computers. Co-requisites are definitely an amazing reform that's really taken off in terms of popularity. Multiple measures placement. All of these are structural reforms that you will see policy leaders and administrators get behind because they don't require much knowledge of math to be able to do. A little bit, but not tons, okay? Then there's other reforms, and these are the kinds of things that I worked with. I met Dana Center, people have done the great folks there 10 years ago when I was working on the QuantWay initiative, and I started working on a course similar to that called Math Literacy. And it was the idea of having a non-STEM developmental course for students so they don't have to take so much remediation, say if they're going to statistics. That's a great reform. That's bottom up, that's faculty, and that's change in terms of content. But you need both. That's the reality. If you're going to make this happen on scale, you need both. So TM stands for transitional math, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. And the reason that it's working in our state is because we do have both. We made structural changes and policy changes, especially in terms of placement, but we're also changing content. So it's not just the same old that we've been offering forever. We specifically designed an experience for seniors to give them what they need on a lot of levels. So this is the law. It's the Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness Act, called the PWR Act. I've got the link there, and I know the slides are going to be available, but if you just want to know more about the PWR Act, this is our comprehensive approach, and it's probably one of the reasons why Illinois doesn't have a team here, because we have a law. And that's... I will tell you, as a local control state, that was super controversial and not something people like. People are used to doing what they want in Illinois institutions all over the place, but definitely educational ones. So there's all these different components of it, but the one thing I want you to see is the part that I work on is the mandate. The other ones are wonderful things to help improve the transition from secondary to post-secondary. Transitional math, that's a requirement. So all 700 high schools have to, within the next 3 years, have a transitional math pathway. I'm going to show you the options, or they have to opt out. And the law says to opt out, you have to have a resolution by your school board saying that it costs more to offer this than what your students gain from it. Or as my boss says, you have to be willing to get up in front of your school board and say, we don't care about students in college. And so we are not going to have many opt-outs. We're going to have about 700 schools doing this, and we have over 200 that are going to be doing it this fall, and we've already had well over 100 in this past year we've got some early adopters, okay? So when we're talking scale, and we have the third largest, I believe, community college system in the United States with 48 community colleges, it's massive, absolutely massive, which is why I'm just tired, y'all. I'm just tired. Okay, so, here's our goal. We want to reduce remediation. The way we do it is during junior year, we're going to use multiple measures for all juniors and determine, we have a common definition that we came up with, if they are college ready, if they're projected to be ready. And if they are, great, get them into AP, dual credit, something higher level their senior year. If they're not, get them into transitional math, specifically one of these new transitional math courses. And we're going to address both their math and their college readiness during their senior year. But here's the catch. Here's the it's not the catch, it's the biggest benefit. They get guaranteed placement at every Illinois community college and any university that'll accept it, that we say, please, 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 and sometimes they accept. And so far, we've got about 7 universities, 4 of which that are public, are interested in accepting this placement. So this is huge. It's not just better preparation, it's they get something for it afterwards. Okay? So the idea is we've got students hitting the ground running, starting a college level coursework with the preparation they need, and that's going to better give them a chance to actually complete whatever they want to complete, degree, certificate, whatever it is. So this is our flow chart, and these are the 3 pathways. So this is a STEM, non-STEM, technical math approach, and high schools are asked to pick one of these pathways and implement it. They don't have to implement all 3. All of these are supposed to be highly contextualized. That's how the law was written, and that's why when I saw the law, I was like, oh, this is amazing. It's like, oh, they got it right. So it's supposed to be highly contextualized. There is algebra, but these are not just traditional algebra courses. If a high school is not sure what to offer, or a student is not sure if they have multiple options, the QL, the middle one, is the course that they are supposed to take or offer. And that's the one we have the most popularity with. It's a course, say if your student is not ready for AP stats their senior year, this is the course for them. And what's really cool is we've got high schools that are going to offer transitional math in the fall, and then those students are going to do dual credit in the spring. So some students are going to graduate with their math done if they're going for an Associates of Arts. That's very exciting to high schools, okay? There's tremendous rigor. So there's none of this, oh, the tech math, that's the watered down one. No, they're all rigorous, they're all challenging. So I want you to see, this is actually a problem from tech math. We are contextualizing this curriculum for a senior, the 17-year-old, who probably doesn't like math, and in a year, by law, is gonna be an adult, and they're gonna be a citizen, they're going to be an employee, and at some point, they're gonna take some college courses, because the vast majority of employers in the US require something past high school, even if it's not a degree. They require coursework. So this is the kind of problems we want to give them. Something that allows them to get a taste of what their field is going to be, but is rigorous and requires something of them. And research says when you do this with students, it engages them. And any of us that have taught non-STEM pathways courses like this at the college level know this works, because courses like this have been around for almost a decade at the college level. So I know I got to wrap this up. All right, so here's the big thing that sets us apart and how we're doing this. In Illinois, we have something called the Illinois Articulation Initiative, and it's a group of faculty from colleges and universities that come together twice a year, and they approve courses at the state level. The law, the PWR Act, defined that we're supposed to have portability panels. And we had our first big meeting last week where we approved courses. It is made up of high school and community college and a few university faculty that meet and approve courses at the state level. And that ensures fidelity, because the idea is there are policies that have to be met and there are competencies that have to be met. So I've given you a link to our website. You can see our full policies and competencies document, and you can see all the nitty-gritty of what do they have to do. It's not just the what, it's the how. Okay? We also have a statewide MOU on there, the template. There's so much information you can see on it. This is something I really talk to everybody in the state. Every single time I present, I remind them of this. This is not dual credit. This is not top down where the college is calling all the shots. Everything we do with transitional math is a partnership. Everything. So every time we have a committee, it's half high school, it's half college, whether it's at the agency level or it's at the school level or at the administrative level, whatever. And they have to play in the sandbox. So what I do is I mitigate conflict on a daily basis, and it's awesome. And it can be done. That's the main thing I want you to know. It can be done. You can get people together and they can work. I think Yuri, I won't say it like how he said it, but you have to be careful who you put at the table. Nice people. You do need some skeptics at the table, but not too many. But you gotta have the right people at the table. So I want to close it up with this. I haven't been a big believer in bottom-up reform as someone who's in faculty, and I did that for a long time. But if you want to do it on scale, you have to work with other things. It's not enough just as a classroom teacher to be able to make change on scale. So you can have that with top-down mandates. In this mandate, we have faculty that worked all the way through it, and you got a former faculty member who's leading it. So it can happen. Collaboration is everything. And I saw this, don't quote me because I didn't say it, someone else said it at a meeting and I don't remember their name, but I'm plagiarizing, said this kind of work moves at the speed of trust. And when I saw that, I was like, holy cow, is that right? Because when you have it, man, can you move forward quickly. And the districts that I work with that have it, they just go. And the ones that don't, they're slower to get along, okay? You gotta have policy, you've gotta have that, but you've gotta have the practitioners. You put them together and you can actually make change. You need some consistency, but if you have too much, people get their back up. So you've got to have some flexibility as well. So in our state, we have common competencies, but we do not have a common textbook or any kind of common curriculum. But we do have common competencies, and we have some commonalities in terms of policies, but there's choice within that. This does not compete with other reforms. It supports guided pathways and co-requisites and multiple measures. All those wonderful things that are happening, it just aligns with them and supports them to create a better system that works to solve, helps a lot of students. And you can get to scale, but I will tell you this, it's a lot of work and you've got to work comprehensively. So things I work on, professional development, curriculum, policy level, communication, implementation, data, there's so many pieces to it. It takes a lot of people, and I don't want to sound like, I just do it all. I don't. I'm managing it all, but I got lots of people that I work with because it takes a lot of people to make it happen. So that's our website. This is my email. If you have questions or you want to reach out to me or you're looking for some ideas, shoot me an email. I'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you. I got a woot.
All right, welcome. Thank you for the invitation to share a little bit what we're doing in Oregon. My name is Mark Freed. I work at the Oregon Department of Education, the math education specialist there, and we have some great work happening at our universities and community colleges, but I just want to share a little experience kind of from a K-12 perspective, from a state agency, and I know it's great to see a lot of state agency staff here. So there's many organizations up here, and I just give a shout out to the Association of State Supervisors of Mathematics, as well as an organization that is a great partner in this work. So, Oregon. Just a little background about our Oregon graduation requirements. Oregon requires 3 credits of high school math. About 5 years ago, we changed that requirement to be at the high school level. So if it was below high school, it had to be given an elective course kind of credit. We have proficiency laws in our state, so we can award by content, not necessarily time-based, although a lot of our schools still do Carnegie units and hours. What this gave us at the state agency was the flexibility by not identifying courses and proficiency. It gave us the flexibility to do a lot of what we're talking about and not having to change our law. And so that's kind of the context we are coming from. I put this in, I have a much longer presentation, but this is just, I put this in here for a timeline, just to kind of think about how long we've been thinking about this stuff. Our first presentation on pathways in Oregon is in 2014 at Northwest Math Conference. We started talking about that before, so we are 6 years into conversations right now, building relationships, listening, and so I don't know who said that don't judge the marathon by the 100-meter sprints, but I think we need a t-shirt of that or something like that, because it takes a long time, it's a lot of work. But also encourage you that it starts small. It really did start with a few conversations and grew over time. So where we're at right now is kind of this area where we're asking, we're working with some high schools to pilot courses to give us feedback on this idea of kind of a plus, kind of a specialty course or a focus course that will lead into our next revision of standards, which is scheduled for the 2020-21 school year. And after that, we'll go into materials and assessments and state assessments. So really it's 23, I think, is when the full implementation year is. So it's a decade. It's like, it's a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun, and it keeps me coming back to work. So having a, what's Mathways, having some goals, I think that's really important to be able to identify those goals and go back to them. The 4 that we landed on were these, and so we actually have a 2-pager on our website that describes these more. But just having this, like, what's Mathways? Well, one part of Mathways is we talk about on track. So how do we get students into grade level content? How do we support them? How do we those issues of equity and detracking? So that is certainly part of the conversation. We also talk about student engagement. So things like applied learning. We have a Math in Real Life grant where we're developing applied math lessons in high school and middle school, complex instruction. So that's something that we want to be working on as well. Focus, what is the core content we want? We want a shorter list of content. What is that math? And then pathways, how do students navigate into pathways? This is not an order of operations. Yeah, you have to do everything at the same time, and that's what we're learning. So, because if you talk about engagement, it's like, I want to do more applied learning. It's like, well, I can't do applied learning because I got this long list of standards. Well, we got to go fix the standards so you get to applied learning. And then so when you start doing focus, like, well, what standards really lend themselves to applied learning? So it's like these things are interconnected. And so to focus on just one area is not enough. It's kind of like these things are on concurrent tracks. What I like to share is at least 2 that I've been working with high school teachers that seem to be resonate a lot. And one is the idea of focus standards. So just to name things we know, Oregon's a Common Core state. I love our K-8 standards. I love the progressions. I love the coherence. I love the focus. High school, it's different. It's just name, it's like there's too many high school standards, period. And I name that for our teachers, and that seems to be like a relief to them. And we want to, that's something, there's good standards, but just by having so many, everyone's trying to do, in practice, everyone's trying to do a subset. And they do the subset that they recognize and they feel, so a lot of teachers don't have to change their practice and keep on doing it because they found it somewhere in the high school standards. So if the standards are big enough to drive a bus through, everyone finds their lane. And no one is like, we don't have consistency across the state. And so how do we narrow that focus so people can't kind of box in that instruction? And another conversation happens around assessment. Usually the conversations assessment is from our public and our parents is concerns over, we have a lot of assessments in 11th grade. And what is the utility of these assessments? And so those are certainly things that are on our mind as we talk about this. So moving forward, how we narrow the content to a core. We looked at the essential skills in NCTM. It's a framework to kind of put out a draft framework that's on our website for schools to use to develop pilot courses. And that piloting is really feedback for us. So if I say these 30 standards you can teach in a year, let's go out and try to teach those 30 standards, and that's part of our standards development process, that feedback process before we get to 2020. And also work on our state framework. So start that early, not wait till 20. So the idea of even like a floating, like 10th grade assessments. Like could we lessen the pressure on that year if we had something in 10th grade? Or so that's something that's on the table, at least we're discussing. So those things are all happening at the same time. To give a picture of what we did last year is we actually went around the state and met teachers in 6, 7 different regions. And what we had is tables just like this. We had math teachers from high schools talk to community college professors, talk to universities. We put them around the table. We gave them a challenge saying, we want focused content. Let's start talking about that. And it was amazing conversations that we had for that. And the way we framed it was, what math beyond 8th grade do you want all students to have when they graduate? It wasn't what course, it's like, so what math? Give me content. And we had some great conversations. They wrote on Post-it notes. They organized the standards the way they thought. So we have one that's like a tree, organize it. About 30 of these groups we did, and I can tell you that no group asked for a second sheet of paper. So at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, if the students could do this, it would be great. And so it is possible. I think that focused content is possible. And these relationships are really important. I think that's what takes time as you do this work. So pathways, what we like to frame it as, like right now what we have, just name our pathway is a pathway to calculus. That's when it made sense to me. It's like, I took calculus, that's why all these paths were leading to that. Reality, our students have a much more complex system that they enter into after they graduate. They might go into a community college or a trade school or military. It's not one outcome, and those outcomes could represent different mathematics for them. So what we settled on is kind of this idea of 2 + 1, and Robert shared it earlier. It's our picture, and we're actually even being careful trying how we organize the picture. It's vertical, so we don't have a lesser pathway. But on the bottom is the KA content, so that's an agreement that we as a state want our students to do the KA content. So what we built after that in our proposal is 2 credits worth of core content. And that balance is about a year's worth of algebra, and that second credit, about half a credit worth of geometry and a half a credit of data science. So pulling back on the geometry and pushing in more data. And we're actually working with schools to take that second year and split it into a geometry stat year. And so that's one of the things we're piloting. And that leads into the paths then. So the Algebra 2 path's still there. Alternate paths could be like, we put in like statistics or data science, a 3rd credit for 11th grade there, or a quantitative reasoning. So construction geometry has come up, math modeling courses, financial algebra. So these are courses people are trying out now in next state. So we kind of see as how that feeds into the post-secondary pathways at some point. So that's the structure of we're proposing for our standards, and by next year, about a year and a half from now, we hope to fill in the details, have standards for our state board. So I'll end with this last thought, because I think, what's my last slide I'm going to have? And we started to talk about equity. I think this question of equity is central for our students, because we want to identify issues of equity, inequities, how do we disrupt systems to help our students? And so this idea of equal versus equitable, and we talk about 1114 pathways. So one thing I was thinking, so if we talk about equal means everyone gets the same thing. So if we have equality, everyone gets, I want to be a math major, I want to be a engineer. It's great, here's your Algebra 2 college algebra bike, it'll take you where you want to go. It's like, I want to be an ag major, I want to be a business major, I want to be construction. Well, great, here's your Algebra 2 college algebra bike, off you go. And I think one of the things you want to anticipate is you're going to get, people will say, but the system works. The system works. And I think the response I have is like, yeah, it worked for me. I majored in math. And so this, it does work, but the question needs to be, yes, it works, but who does it work for? And so that's the question we want to bring to light. So it works for the people, great for some people. Some people it kind of works, and some people are wondering why you gave them a bike. So it's like, why you give me this? So equity was really, is like, what would the system look like if we could design structures that meet students' needs? So so in this system is still our Algebra 2. Algebra 2 is still there, our calculus pathway is still there. Some courses might be an easy fix, easy adapt, and some might need to be re-engineered, rethinking the way we design the course. But for those students that needed it, it's exactly what they want to get to where they're going. And so I think it's good work, it's exciting work. Where this happens, I think can be up to different states. We have chosen by the 2+1 model, say at 11th grade, is where these customizations can start happening. And so that's where we're working forward to the next year and a half. So I'll say thank you. And I have my contact up here. Tom Thompson at the Oregon Department of Education is CTE specialist and now STEM specialist. And that's a great partnership as well. So I recommend if you have not connected with your CTE kind of applied, that is a great partner's work. So Tom and I are both available to connect if you have questions, and I think that's it for me. That's it.
All right. Thank you all for sharing all of those wonderful things that are happening in your states and the great work that you are doing. So we'll move into a Q&A session, and I'm going to start with a question or a topic that we had discussed previously. And Mark, I'm glad that you ended with equity because that was actually going to be one of my first questions. So what have been some of the concerns in your states around equity, and how have you addressed those issues?
Well, is this on? Is this on?
It's on.
Yeah, okay. I wanted to say that I think math pathways, the work on math pathways has attended to equity in some ways. The challenge with math pathways is when the question comes up, well, how do you have math pathways without tracking students? And it's complicated. In the state of California, I think the folks implementing pathways have said correctly that, well, but the traditional system isn't working, and having these new pathways is better because students effectively are already being tracked out of education with the traditional pathways, which is true. And the new math pathways that are being developed are not intended to track students. At the same time, I'm concerned that the potential exists for them to be implemented in ways that are tracking students. And I think that it's important to be attentive to that, or it might be more likely to happen. I think several things are key. One is messaging about the pathways. Another is that the pathways are not just, that the pathways are truly rigorous and lead to future college opportunity. But they also, even if they are, they also need to not be perceived as inferior, and these are challenges. And another challenge is, I hear often, sort of anecdotally, but a faculty member will say, well, you know, the statistics pathway, that's for students who didn't do well in high school, for example. And if that's the messaging, or if that's what people are saying to themselves, then that isn't going to really achieve the goal of equity. So I think it requires a lot of intention. And the other piece is around authentic, pathways are supposed to be chosen, but how can students have authentic choice and really have agency if, as we've learned, there are a lot of challenges with students developing positive math identity. So I think at every stage of the way we need to be attentive to this. We need to also make sure if a student is in a stats pathway who later determines they want to go into a STEM field, that there's a way for them to do that. And I think the research community needs to look at this. My organization is going to be starting a little bit of research and developing a research agenda around how we do look at equity in math pathways, not to criticize math pathways, but to support and reinforce the role of equity in them. Sorry for a long answer, but I've been thinking about it a lot.
No, that's fine.
Is this on? Hello? Maybe.
Sure.
Okay, it's on. I think our first step in Ohio has really been spending a lot of time looking at disaggregated data to see what the problem is. And it's clearly, as you would imagine, a problem. So I think we've got some ideas and we're starting to do some things, and now that we have a baseline of data, we maybe will see if we're being successful. So we're looking into different types of placement measures. We're hoping that that will help us in certain ways. I know, for example, one of the things to prevent tracking is in the work that the faculty members are doing on the transition course. What they specifically chose for a transition course is a course that's based on quantitative reasoning, but includes the concepts that students would need if they were going to continue on to a STEM-based path, or if they were going to continue in quantitative reasoning, or if they were going to continue into stats, with the idea that just making them stronger quantitative thinkers, getting them more comfortable with mathematics, is going to help. So again, we don't have the answers yet. We're trying some different things. We're going to continue to watch the data, and hopefully we'll find out what some of the successes are.
Definitely equity is something that we're talking about in Illinois. I've noticed, I mean, we've been so wrapped up with proposed legislation. We actually have proposed legislation right now for mandating co-recs, mandating multiple measures placement. Basically, once we got the PWR Act, it's like the floodgates just opened. But now all the policy work is coming, the conversations are coming back to, but are we serving all of our students? And looking at disaggregated data, we're not, and we know that, and it needs a tremendous amount of work. We are hoping that the different components of the PWR Act are gonna help in transitional math, and I think it's because, one of the things we're hoping is because every student in the state of Illinois will have that opportunity, and right now, only the wealthier districts are doing something like that in our state. And opportunities like dual credit, a lot of the rural districts don't have those opportunities, but this is going to give students a chance. Maybe they can't do dual credit, but they're going to go right into college level math. And it only relies on their current staffing instead of having a dual credit qualified teacher. So we have a lot of work to do, but I'm encouraged with what is going to come, but we're just going to have to continue to look at the data.
And I think I would agree with the statements about not being careful not to have a lesser pathway, student choice. I think one additional thought I would add is just the importance of talking with people and getting out in the field, because I think it's those relationships we build, listening to those concerns. I think those table conversations we had were really powerful. And framing the conversation around content and not courses is really important. So let's have a conversation. I want to have all our students to be, have their hopes and dreams and have the flexibility, but tell me what do we need? What content and we have those kind of conversations. I think what seems to be the result of these, we've had 6-hour facility conversations around this content, and we come to very similar conclusions. It's not a huge list that we all want for our students. And so when people see that smaller list, it's really encouraging. It's like, I think we could create high quality courses around this content that we would all see value in. So don't underestimate the power of just putting people around the table and talking with each other.
Are there any questions from the audience? Yes, right here in the black.
So I have a question. So I agree pathways are great. I come from a community college. We have pathways. I worry, however, that pathways at the high school level will start to restrict students from the degrees that they may want to pursue later on. How do you answer that concern?
I'd like to answer that. This is the number one thing, is I've been working on pathways for a decade, and the number one question is, what if they change their major? And we don't see a ton of poets becoming engineers. I don't know if anybody's going into poetry, but anyway. But what we do see, because I see this all the time, is people finding hidden prereqs that they did not realize they had, and so they're maybe not even changing their major, but they find that they need college algebra, and that's on the STEM path. And so what do they do? So the main thing that I think is absolutely essential is, like the one thing I talked about, transitional math. Yeah, it's very exciting, but you have to have a complement of what happens at the college that goes with it. And if you have a co-requisite approach that goes with it, then when that student, say they're in the quantitative literacy pathway and they find out, oh, my nursing degree requires college algebra, they're not going to take 3 semesters to get college algebra because the college has already been working on that. So I think that's key to it, to try to recognize that there's going to be some movement. But I do think that the approach that we've had forever, for 40 years, of let's give everybody the same because that gives so many opportunities, has not led to as much as we want. I do think it's worth having students specialize somewhat, but not too much.
And I think what the design we're talking about for our upper division courses is that there would be some modular ability for students to take a course. If they choose to take instruction geometry their junior year and decide they want us to take the algebra 2, college algebra track, there's still room for that in the senior year. Actually, we've had evidence of students who take an alternate path and then go back into an algebra 2 class and do better than they might have done before because they were ready for it in their senior year. So I think as long as the path goes somewhere, so it's not a path to nowhere, so the pathway has to go to a destination, so we engineer them that way, and then there's ways students can get from one path to another. Hopefully, if only like 1 or 2 courses they might have to change, that seems like people change majors and take extra years, but if we can minimize the number of courses that it takes to switch from one to the next, I think that is important to show as well.
It seems to me that the biggest questions come around the Algebra 2, and we know even from Catalyzing Change that there are recommendations that Algebra 2 as a course should be reformed because of it's not serving everyone. But I do wonder, okay, so the student who takes the non-Algebra 2 pathway in high school and doesn't take it in their senior year, then what happens at college? Are they admissible to college in Oregon, or what?
Well, I think
what
that's
are the
part
requirements?
of the work we're doing
Okay,
now, but I think, connecting the high school paths to post-secondary paths. So if it is a quantitative reasoning path, that leads into those majors in post-secondary. And so we're clear with students that this is the path and these are the majors that it connects to when you leave high school. So that's where the student choice comes in, just being like helping students understand the different paths, and then
So they can get into like a university without Algebra 2?
it depends on the institution.
It depends on the university, okay.
So community colleges don't have
Right.
quite the same prerequisite, but I think that is something that would be great to talk about as a multi-state prerequisites as we move into Division I 4-year schools.
I'd like to emphasize what you said. I think in Ohio, and I think around the country, lots and lots of both colleges and universities are thinking about how they can accelerate those DevEd sequences, through co-requisite remediation. So I do think that there are ways for people to switch when they get into college if they do make those kinds of big switches. But again, I think the data show that people tend, when they change their paths, as you mentioned, you use poets and engineering, but I think the kinds of changes that people make tend to be relatively narrow. And so, or at least the vast majority of people. So for those few students who do change widely, if we can make those developmental education sequences shorter or use co-requisite remediation, it mitigates those problems.
I think we'll quickly have time for one more question and one. Oh, yes.
the community college is, in the original law, it was written that both all community colleges and public universities would have to accept it, but you know, when the sausage got made, the universities fell out. But all the community colleges have to accept it, and that was a hard pill to swallow for the community colleges. So having faculty at the table, because it's been just a culture shift. They're used to relying on Accuplacer and the idea of you're going to accept a course. And so we had to really work on the idea that it's not just any course done just any way, that there are checks and balances. And I just hit the highlights. There's a lot more to what we're doing, but there's a lot of checks and balances along the way that have allowed people to relax a little bit. It's like, okay, because if the data comes back poorly, this is one of the things that we built in. If the high school students come to a community college, and let's say the 99% of them are passing in the high school and none of them are passing in the college, then that will require them to adjust their memo of understanding. Data will inform future decisions. It's not like just okay, that's all there is. So that has allowed people to get on board because they feel like they're part of the process, and it will have a sound approach.
Was it a grade of C or higher?
Yes, it's a grade of C or higher. They define C how they want, but it's C or higher. We haven't been looking, because I've seen that data, we haven't been looking at like how they did in the ACT before or after the course. What we've been looking at are how the students doing in the outcome courses compared to students that came through the traditional pathway. And so far, we don't have mass data, but so far all the schools that have given us data at the state level have shown that the students, there's no statistical significant difference in how they do than the students that came through the traditional pathway. So they are able to pass the courses, and they're doing fine in them.
Okay, and thank you to Pamela, Stephanie, Kathy, and Mark. Let's give them a round of applause.
All right, that's a good job.
We're now going to hear from Katie Arrington, and she'll give you some instructions on what happens immediately after this.
All right, you guys, if you will give me just a few minutes, I'll get you on your way. All right. I know it's about time for a break, so I promise I'll be fast. Do you remember what I told you earlier? When I'm on stage, that means you're about to do some work? Yeah? Okay. All right, so I have a little reminder for you about some things that you've already done that we're going to connect to, and then I'm essentially going to give you some instructions for the rest of your day and some logistical information for tonight and tomorrow, okay? So we know that we're talking about big, complex change here, and what we know is the greater the complexity of the change, the more important it is that we understand the systems that we're working in. And when we say system, in this case, it's K-12 and higher ed and how that connects to the workforce, right? So we had you guys do some data collection and information gathering before you came here. So these forms hopefully will look familiar, at least to most of you. We had you do a readiness assessment for your state that included attention to things like leadership and commitment, transfer and applicability, your state ed context, so thinking about kind of where the power and influence lies, what is the governance structure, those kinds of things. And we had you collect some student level data. So we have these documents because you submitted them to us. So we're gonna let you access those again today in case you haven't looked at them in a while and in case you haven't talked about them as a team. So what we're gonna ask you to do this afternoon in your 4:15 to 5:15 section is to obviously think about the learnings you had from today, but access this data and information. The bit.ly link that's on here is gonna be the same for everyone except for that last blue part, which is just your state name. So this is the exact link for Arizona, but you would insert your state name at the end there, and you should be able to access all of the data that you submitted to us, okay? what you're going to do with this is really start to define the problem that your task force is going to work on. Okay, so what is it that your data is telling you is an issue that you guys want to address as your task force? Now let me be super clear about this. This is going to be a very short version of your problem statement. What you want to do is really just get everybody together and start thinking about what is the direction, right? What is the big overarching problem statement that we might define? Eventually, your problem statement's going to be very detailed, but today is just high level, which direction are we going? And what we want you to do by the end of the day today is to have a draft of a problem statement. You're going to put that on a poster, and you're going to include some of the data about why that problem is your priority, okay? What we're going to do with that is a gallery walk in the morning. So before 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, but probably tonight, what we'd like you to do is bring your posters back here and put them up on the walls in here. That way in the morning you can walk around and see kind of the direction that all of the teams are going and kind of get some feedback from others about yours as well, if you want to talk about those. So I'm going to wait just a second, make sure that someone on your team has either taken a picture or written down the link to where to access your data. Your goal this afternoon is to look at that data. I loved the way the panel talked about this in our discussion just now. Who is the system serving well? Who is it not serving well? Look for those trends in your data and let that inform your decision making about the problem that you're trying to solve. You're going to put those on posters with some evidence to back it up, and you're going to bring it back here. Your work time officially ends at 5:15, but if you bring it back at the speaker later tonight or whatever, that's fine too. All right, so let's talk a few logistics. You have on your table a copy of this in case you want to take one or two with you. This is a copy of the groupings that we're going to be using. We'll get more into the details about what we're going to do in these cohorts tomorrow. But you can see that we've defined 5 cohorts of states that will be working together over the next 18 months. We'll be having regular check-ins and thinking together about the progress that you're making. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about structures and things like that tomorrow. But your breakout groups, do you see at the bottom of the page? Everybody has a room to go to, and what we'd like you to do is go to those rooms because we want to be able to find you, okay? We want to be able to come support you. So speaking of that, on the green row up here, I hope you'll notice that we have an incredible group of table and group facilitators. These are all folks who are part of the CBMS Planning Committee or part of the Dana Center. And they're assigned to come be supports for you. They're going to come listen. They're going to come ask you questions. They're going to prompt you. And if needed, they might go grab somebody else to come in and sit with you. Okay, so we have a lot of experts here. We can bring people in to provide like real-time support. If you're stuck on something, let one of your table facilitators know, and either they can help you or they can grab somebody else who can, okay? That's why it's important that you be in the room where we've assigned you, just because then we know where to send people. There will be poster, paper, and markers in there. If there's not when you first arrive, it will arrive soon, okay? Speakers, if you are not assigned to a room, you can choose to go sit with a group. That would be great if you want to go listen. I don't think any of the groups would mind terribly. All right, we'll talk more about other logistics around cohorts in a little bit, but you've got your room assignment. You've got your assignment for what you're going to do today. The last couple of things are just officially we're working till 5:15, but y'all decide how to manage that the best you can. You're on your own for dinner, so we have a break between 5:15 and I believe it is 8:30. I'm sorry? What time is the speaker tonight? 8:30. That's what I thought. Okay, so you have from 5:15 to 8:30 to go do dinner on your own, and then we'll have the speaker back here tonight. In the morning, we'll do 7 to 8 breakfast, and we'll have the gallery walk, so you might want to come down a little earlier. We'll start at 8 o'clock tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.